folks, George from georgehealth.com. I'm going to talk a little bit today that goes on beyond what I've covered before in the Know Your Muscle, Grow Your Muscle video. And that one, if you've seen it, or loads of people have already seen it, talks about use of ATP, where that is the basic energy in our body that we use to contract muscle, and it releases one of the phosphates, the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, releases a phosphate, goes into ADP, and that gives us our energy to contract muscle. I'm going to talk a little bit more about ATP in this video because I've had a few requests about it, and we're going to talk about muscle fiber types as well in this video and a few of the other videos, learning to train and give nutrition and do everything for the right muscle fiber types depending on your goal. And just by understanding the science behind all of this, you'll be able to set your nutrition and your training up so that you're getting your goals and you're training for the right goal, basically. Because there's different ways that ATP can be produced, and there's only a set amount in the body. There's three different ways. There's the ATP with the creatine phosphate, can be produced with glycogen, glucose from carbohydrates, and it can be produced through fat oxidation. So depending on what you want to achieve, whether it be fat loss, muscle growth, all the other different goals for endurance, power, strength, etc., you're going to have to adjust the way you do things to produce the correct muscle fiber type for your body and produce ATP in the way that's going to help you best towards your goals. Okay, so let's talk about them. The first one I'll talk about is creatine phosphate. So as we've talked about before, ATP gets used up pretty quickly. Okay, so we're doing a set with the weights, and if we were going like max all out, ATP, the immediate energy of ATP, gets used up in like 1.26 seconds from doing like a maximum 1 rep max exercise. So from there we need to start producing ATP again, and the quickest way that you can do that is creatine phosphate, where it takes creatine phosphate plus ADP, because we've got ATP converted into ADP, so it gets that ADP, puts creatine phosphate into it, and then we get ATP back and some creatine. This is an anaerobic reaction. It doesn't need oxygen for this, so that means it's going to be able to be done quickly. So it doesn't matter about, you're breathing and you're not going to get out of breath from doing this because it doesn't require oxygen. There's only a certain amount of creatine phosphate that's in the muscle as well. So even after about 10 seconds of maximum effort, this pathway is going to be used up as well. With the creatine phosphate reaction, this is one of the reasons why creatine supplementation is actually good for performance in the gym. What happens is the ATP and the creatine you take will get turned into ADP and creatine phosphate. So it means you'll have a ready energy supply of creatine phosphate and ADP in the system, ready to produce the ATP and creatine. So that's why creatine supplementation is actually pretty good, because it will help this pathway. It will saturate the muscles with creatine, and it will give it a greater energy source of creatine phosphate to be able to sustain that pathway a bit longer and be able to keep producing ATP quickly, giving you more power and more strength output. So we've got ATP, the immediate energy, that gets used up in 1.26 seconds, and now we've got the creatine phosphate with ADP, and that process gets used up in about 10 seconds because we've run out of creatine phosphate. So from that point, your body's going to start having to tap into glucose. There's a bit of glucose stored in your muscles in the form of glycogen, and there's also glucose in the bloodstream. So this comes from having good carbohydrates, and having carbohydrates in your system when you do your workouts. It's one of the reasons you need carbohydrates in your diet to be able to use this pathway to produce ATP and get performance in the gym. It takes a little bit longer to do. It's a bit of a longer chemical reaction, but it will allow us again to get more ATP and allow us to keep performing a little longer in the gym. One of the things that can get produced, or one of the things that does get produced when we do this reaction, which is with the glycolytic pathway with glycogen, is you get a buildup of lactic acid. And the lactic acid is that pump you feel when you do things like bicep curls or you do a lot of reps. You get like a big muscle pump and it's like getting engorged and enlarged, and that's just a buildup of lactic acid. And your body can't clear it out of the muscle as fast as it's being produced within the muscle. So that's where you get your pump. And so doing anything from about a minute, if you're doing like a minute of continuous go, go, go lifting, that's going to produce a lot of lactic acid. The limit at which you can do this depends on how quickly your body can get rid of lactic acid and how much you can mentally and physically tolerate with lactic acid buildup. The longer you can tolerate it, the quicker your body can get it out, the longer you can use this pathway to keep the muscle contracting and keep going on your sets longer. After about 2 minutes, all of these pathways are exhausted. You're running out of glucose in your system, and the glucose can't come into the muscle fast enough. You've run out of creatine phosphate, you've run out of immediate energy sources. So at this point your body's going to get pretty tired. All that's left is the oxidative pathway. When we get to the oxidative pathway, it requires oxygen. This is the first one that uses oxygen. It gets fat, it oxidizes fat, and it produces all the necessary ingredients for what's called the Krebs cycle to then produce ATP. It's actually quite a slow process. It takes time. It's not going to be able to produce as much power, but it's going to be able to last longer. So people that are doing endurance events or low weight, high rep exercises that are like 2 minutes or longer, that's going to use this pathway more. It's good for fat oxidation. It's good for being able to sustain endurance for a long time, but it can't produce as much power. And it's, you know, not strong at any particular one point in time, but it is strong overall because it produces a lot over a sustained period of time. Okay, so hopefully I've explained that all right. We've got the general ATP, which is used up pretty quickly. Then we've got some creatine phosphate in the muscle, which helps replenish ATP. Once the creatine phosphate's used up, it's also using glycogen in the blood and the muscle to produce ATP. All of them can happen pretty quick, but you know, after 2 minutes of maximum effort, you know, like really heavy stuff for 2 minutes, that's all going to run out and you're fatigued, and that's the point where you're just like, you're done. From that point onwards, it's oxygen and the oxidative pathway with fat burning or fat oxidation that's going to keep you going. This is why you can do a set of squats and you're dead afterwards, but you can kind of still walk around a bit, because that pathway, that oxidative pathway, is still going. Hopefully that's given you a bit of insight in how ATP has been produced. In the next video I'm going to talk about the different muscle fiber types and how each of the different muscle fiber types are better at producing ATP using one pathway compared to the other. And from knowing that information, you're going to be able to train the body in the correct way to produce that muscle fiber type, which is going to go towards the goal that you want to achieve, depending on if you want to do it for power, strength, endurance, etc. So I'll see you in that video.